We're going to discuss today a very serious topic, and that is domestic violence here in New Jersey. And we're hoping to offer everyone out there some assistance on getting some help and hopefully getting safe. Now, in this webinar, we're going to define domestic violence or abuse. We're going to discuss the signs of domestic violence. We're going to talk about seeking help and some impediments that are out there to seeking help. We're going to tell you about New Jersey crimes of domestic violence. We're going to explain a bit to you about the legal process of obtaining a restraining order. And lastly, we're going to give you some resources where you can go and hopefully get some additional help and information. So, what is domestic violence and who are victims of domestic violence? Domestic violence includes things like verbal abuse, physical abuse, or controlling behavior that's directed towards a current or former intimate partner or adult household member. Of course, physical assault is probably the easiest type of domestic violence to physically spot. Now, many signs of domestic violence overlap. And early signs can be easy to dismiss, especially if the victim feels emotionally close or dependent on their abuser. It's true victims are more frequently women, but domestic violence is absolutely a genderless problem here in the United States, and it affects men and women in different sex or same-sex relationships equally. Now, elderly victims may also experience domestic violence from adult household members. Domestic violence is generally the term used when abuse is towards adults rather than children. That term is more commonly known as child abuse. But children who witness domestic violence in the homes can also experience great psychological harm and damage. So that's sort of a collateral damage or offshoot towards domestic violence in the home. Now let's take some examples of some couples to help us illustrate and understand domestic violence in a relationship. So the first couple we're going to talk about is Ethan and Candice. Ethan is not physical when he's abusive of Candice, but he often belittles her. He swears at her. He keeps her from having close relationships with her family and friends. Sometimes he'll take her car keys away or even physically block her from leaving the house. This is, without question, domestic violence. Now, our next couple is Robert and Becky. Robert and Becky have dated for a few years, but they recently split up. Becky has started calling Robert all hours of the day and night. She leaves him angry messages. She uses vulgarity. She screams at him. She's actually even shown up at his home uninvited and once or twice entered his home through an unlocked door looking for him. His car was recently vandalized, and he is convinced that Becky is responsible for the damage. This also is an example of domestic violence. And lastly, we're going to look at Cassandra and Blake. Their relationship began to change recently when Blake lost his job and he began drinking excessively. Both of them are having trouble controlling themselves, and the pressures of money and alcohol are causing them both to physically lash out. Cassandra has slapped Blake across the face, and he responded by pushing her against a door frame, which resulted in some pretty serious bruising to her shoulder. This is obviously also a situation of domestic violence. Now let's talk a bit about some of the signs of domestic violence. And this is really important, not only if you feel as though you may be in a violent relationship, but perhaps maybe a friend or family member, you're suspicious maybe in a relationship that has domestic violence going on. So if you're afraid of your partner, your former partner, or any other household member, or if you feel that you have low self-esteem or a lack of confidence in yourself because of the relationship, this is a big warning sign or flag. And please know that early domestic abuse behaviors can require the help of a mental health professional. And without this help, the behavior frequently gets worse over time. So don't wait. Even if you're in a relationship now where your abuser is exhibiting what you would consider mild symptoms, if you don't get help for yourself or for your abuser, if your abuser doesn't seek help, that behavior will most likely escalate. Don't wait, seek help now. Now, anger issues are at the root of many forms of domestic violence, and they may appear early and prior to any actual physical violence. So some flags to watch out for here with regard to anger issues are an unpredictable or volatile temper, a tendency to scream or yell or throw things when upset, or even threats of physical violence. These are definite red flags to watch out for. Controlling or jealous behaviors. These are also common manifestations of domestic violence, and they may also precede physical abuse. Some signs to look out for here are excessive jealousy or possessiveness, limiting a victim's activities outside the home, keeping them from friends or family, and even monitoring or restricting phone or computer usage. In this day and age, monitoring or tracking of electronic devices is becoming more and more frequent. Another red flag, economic or financial abuse. That involves keeping the victim from being able to financially leave the relationship. You should look out for restricting access to finances, taking away MAC cards, ATM cards, removing names from bank accounts, confiscating paychecks, even abusing the credit of a victim or stealing the victim's financial identity. Things to look out for there. Emotional or psychological abuse. This is a very common form of abuse that can escalate and also lead to physical violence. And some examples are criticizing, name-calling, cursing, threatening to destroy property, threatening to injure or kill the victim, threatening to harm someone else close to the victim, or even threatening to harm themselves. Sometimes abusers will threaten to kill themselves. Destruction of property, also a common form of abuse or control. They will threaten to destroy the property of the victim. They will use property in a way that's likely to cause harm to the victim. And sometimes they even use dangerous substances such as fire without safety precautions as a threat. So something else to keep a lookout for. Also, child or animal abuse. Now, these behaviors are covered by separate laws, but they are absolutely danger signs of domestic violence. If your abuser is threatening to harm your child or your pet, a red flag for domestic abuse controlling behavior. Also, another form of domestic violence, sexual abuse. If there's any unwanted physical touching, any coercion for physical contact, any threats to force you to perform any sort of sexual acts, also domestic violence. Now we're going to offer you a bit of information on how you can seek help. Of course, if you are in immediate danger, you should call 911. Get help and get out. Leave the premises and go to your nearest police station. You can also call the domestic violence hotline. Here in New Jersey, the number is 1-800-572-7233. Again, that's 1-800-572-HELP. Nationwide, the number that you can call is 1-800-799-7233. Again, that's 1-800-799-HELP, and that's a nationwide toll-free number. Now, some common impediments to seeking help are emotions such as fear, embarrassment, guilt, or sadness that the victim may actually be experiencing, and this may be a barrier for the victim going to get help. There also is a strong belief that especially if there are children involved, that the family should stay together no matter what for the benefit of the children. But as we talked about earlier, this is usually not a good idea, especially if the children are witnessing the abuse in the house. And there's also an extreme fear of retaliation. If you've been living with an abuser for a period of time that threatens you repeatedly, you may have fear that if you go, that your abuser will carry out these threats. So let's go back to our couples that we talked about earlier and talk about some of the impediments that they may face. First, Ethan and Candice, what are some impediments that they may face? Well, Candice's self-esteem has been severely affected by her situation with Ethan, and this is interfering with her ability to recognize just how bad the situation is. Also, she is financially dependent on Ethan, and she has 2 young children who are also obviously financially dependent on him. Candice needs to make a plan. She needs to seek out the assistance of a therapist to formulate how she can begin extricating herself from this relationship. And she should also contact a family law attorney to find out how legally she can proceed, not only to combat the violence, but also how she can think about starting to get some financial help from Ethan. Now let's talk about Robert and Becky. Robert just doesn't know that Becky's actions are domestic violence, and this is an impediment to him getting help. And the reason he doesn't know that it's domestic violence is because they were never really married or even lived together. And this is a common misnomer that it can't be domestic violence if the 2 people were never in the same household. But that's just not true. He also doesn't want to report her behavior because he feels sorry for her and he doesn't want her to get into any trouble. He does feel as though she needs emotional support, and he may feel a bit responsible that he has to be the one providing her that support, but he's not qualified to do that. She needs to seek professional help. He needs to consider filing a police report and talking to an attorney. Now, lastly, Blake and Cassandra, what are their impediments? Well, both Blake and Cassandra are depressed, and neither want to end the relationship. Cassandra believes that Blake has been abusive to her, but she does not see her own behavior as abusive, and that's a problem because that will prevent her from seeking the help that she needs. She is not physically safe in the home if these incidents continue because Blake is physically much larger than she is. She needs to ask him to stay somewhere else for the time being. And both of them need to seek help for depression and for anger. Blake needs to seek help for his alcohol issues. A good plan of action is to sit down and make a safety plan for yourself. First thing you want to do is pack clothes, something that you can grab and go if you need to. Your safety plan should also include gathering important documents such as your birth certificate and passports for you and your children. Be sure to bring with you a list of important addresses and telephone numbers. Also, teach your children how to use the phone and what to do in case of an emergency. Decide in advance if you will go to the home of a friend or of a family member, or if you will proceed to a domestic violence shelter. Also important, keep evidence of abuse. Keep a detailed diary of every instance of abuse, no matter how small it may seem to you at the time. Save abusive letters, emails, text messages, or voicemails that are threatening or that contain abusive language. Photograph and keep any photographs of any injuries that you may have sustained. Keep copies of emergency room records or doctor's reports. And once you gather all of this together, bring it with you to your attorney or to the police or when filing for a restraining order at your courthouse. Talk to an attorney. Make a consultation with an attorney part of your safety plan. Please be rest assured that your consultation is confidential. It is really important to have an attorney help you if you need financial assistance from your abuser, because they can direct you on how to proceed with filing for spousal support or even child support. And you can ask the court for counsel fees from your abuser. You may also want to think about maintaining a confidential address. If you are concerned that your abuser will know where you're now living and may show up at your new address, ask that your new address be omitted from any court papers, including the restraining order. Domestic violence victims can apply for a long-term confidential address through the New Jersey Address Confidentiality Program. On request, your state and local government records can also be kept confidential. So when is domestic violence an actual crime in New Jersey? Well, the New Jersey Prevention of Domestic Violence Act is the law that defines domestic violence, and it also includes 14 specific criminal offenses defined as domestic violence when they are committed upon a spouse, a former spouse, or dating partner, or a household member. Now, these crimes can be prosecuted in criminal court, but they are also a basis for relief in family court under the New Jersey Prevention of Domestic Violence Act. Now, the 14 crimes of domestic violence are homicide, assault, terroristic threats, kidnapping, criminal restraint, false imprisonment, sexual assault, criminal sexual contact, lewdness, criminal mischief, burglary, criminal trespass, harassment, and stalking. Let's look at our couples again, shall we? Now, Ethan and Candice, what crimes, if any, were committed here under the New Jersey Prevention of Domestic Violence Act? Well, by communicating in offensively coarse language or in an annoying or alarming manner, Robert may have committed harassment under the act. By physically preventing Candice from leaving the home, he may have committed false imprisonment. Candice should discuss the restraining order process based upon these two offenses with her attorney, and she really should think about obtaining temporary restraining orders that include spousal and child support. Robert and Becky. Now, Becky may have engaged in harassment under the act by making those frequent and angry phone calls to Robert. She's also committed criminal trespass by entering his home without permission. And vandalizing Robert's car amounts to her having committed criminal mischief. Her behavior is escalating into what is well known to the courts as stalking behavior. Now, Blake and Cassandra, both of them have committed simple assault by the slapping of Blake's face by Cassandra and by Blake pushing Cassandra into the doorway. Both have cases for restraining orders here, but neither wants to pursue any legal action at this time. But they both need to understand that if they remain in this situation and don't seek help, they are both in danger and at great risk. So now let's talk a little bit about the legal process of restraining orders here in New Jersey. First, let's talk about the temporary restraining order. That is the first step, and it is the document that is gotten first in restraining order matters. The temporary restraining order prevents your abuser from having contact with you temporarily, and it can also offer other help such as child or spousal support. Then comes the final restraining order. This may be ordered by a judge after a court hearing, and the final restraining order hearing is usually within 10 days after the temporary restraining order is issued. Both you and your abuser appear at the hearing and testify under oath. So what are the objectives of restraining orders here in New Jersey? Well, the objectives are to, of course, stop contact between the victim and abuser, any contact, be it text message, in-person contact, telephone contact, any type of contact at all is prohibited. The restraining order can keep the abuser at a specified distance away from the victim. The abuser is also kept away from the victim's home, the victim's job, school, or other locations specified in the restraining order. The restraining order keeps the abuser from contacting the victim via third party. So an abuser is not allowed to have their friend or family member reach out to the victim on their behalf. This is a violation of a restraining order. Restraining orders also provide relief regarding children. They can provide a temporary visitation order or a denial of visitation, depending on the situation. There can also be an order for a risk assessment to determine if there is a need for supervised visitation. And these risk assessments are typically done locally with the assistance of a center that performs such type of assessments, like the probation department or a psychological practice. And restraining orders can also include orders for temporary financial child support. Other financial relief that can be included in restraining orders, in addition to child support, is spousal support, which is a weekly or monthly payment to the spouse victim, payment of mortgage or rent, orders for payment of attorney's fees or medical bills, and even damages for injuries or lost wages because of the abuse. Other relief that can be ordered under the New Jersey Prevention of Domestic Violence Act: the abuser can be ordered to go to batterers intervention programs. Dangerous weapons belonging to the abuser can be seized, and the abuser may be forbidden from owning firearms in the future. And the abuser may be ordered to other types of treatment if needed, such as drug or alcohol treatment. So how do you file a domestic violence complaint and request a temporary restraining order? Well, first and foremost, you can file forms for a civil complaint and temporary restraining order either at your local county courthouse in the family division or at a police station. Local county courthouse hours are Monday to Friday, 8:30 a.m. to 4 p.m. When the courts are closed, proceed to the police station. You would go to the police station on weekends and Monday to Friday after 4 o'clock. When you arrive at the police station or at the court, tell the clerk or the officer on duty that you're a victim of domestic violence and you would like to obtain a restraining order. So how do you convert your TRO, temporary restraining order, to an FRO? Within 10 days, you and your abuser will appear in family court before a judge for a hearing to determine if your temporary restraining order should be made final or permanent. Both you and your abuser will testify under oath, and the judge will make the decision. Strongly consider having an attorney represent you in this hearing. An experienced attorney can lessen your anxiety for sure and can make the difference between your TRO being dismissed or being made permanent. A final restraining order hearing is just like any other court hearing. There is testimony, there's evidence, and the judge makes a decision after hearing all of the evidence that is presented. The final restraining order, as we discussed earlier, can include any relief that is in the temporary restraining order, such as financial support or payment of attorney's fees. It's very important to note that timing is critical. Do not wait to file for a restraining order. Any gap in time between the last incident of domestic violence and your filing for your temporary restraining order will be very closely examined by the court. The court will evaluate whether or not the judge believed that domestic violence occurred, and the court will also evaluate whether or not there is a continued need for domestic violence. So make your case as strong as possible. Gather all of your evidence and don't delay in seeking the restraining order. So after you go through the hearing and hopefully your final restraining order has been granted to you, what happens next? Well, very important, you should keep copies of the final restraining order on you at all times. And that includes in your car, in your home, and on your person. Women should keep a copy of the restraining order in their purse. Also, give copies to your local police station, to your friends and family, and to your children's school as well. If the abuse involved your abuser showing up at your home or repeatedly contacting you via telephone, consider changing your address and consider getting a new telephone number. If you have children and they're old enough to understand, sit them down and tell them what the new parenting schedule will be if one was put in place. That way they know not to go with your abuser if they attempt to pick them up off schedule. Again, make sure that there is a copy of your final restraining order at the children's school. If your abuser contacts you, immediately call the police and make a report. Your abuser can be arrested immediately for violating the final restraining order that has been put in place. Do not hesitate. And it doesn't matter how many times your abuser contacts you, make a report each and every time. If you wish and if you are ready, you can begin considering divorce proceedings against your abuser if you were married to him or her. Talk to your family law attorney about how to best proceed with filing for divorce, how to file for divorce, what to ask for in your divorce. If you're looking for or need any additional relief, please visit our website for additional resources. Our website is www.weinbergerlawgroup.com. Other organizations in New Jersey that can assist you include the Center for Hope and Safety in Bergen County, which can be reached at 201-944-9600. The New Jersey Coalition for Battered Women, which can be reached at area code 609-584-8107. And also Shelter Our Pets at 973-506-9696 for assistance with housing your pets if you are entering a domestic violence shelter. As always, feel free to reach out to us with any further questions or comments at weinbergerlawgroup.com or at 888-888-0919. We hope you found today's webinar enjoyable, informative, and we hope that if you are in a situation where you need help, that you will seek it. Again, there are many resources available to victims of domestic violence. Don't hesitate. And of course, if you're in immediate danger, seek help of the police and get out of the situation. We look forward to visiting with you again next time. Thank you again.